the dark, kindle the spark in me.
You know, when you're driving on the road, especially an old back road like this, there are lots of ways to go wrong. There are lots of places you could end up in trouble. I mean, obviously, the path is laid out pretty clearly right in front, but veer off to the right, you're into the woods. Veer off to the left, you're in a ditch. That's just the nature of things. I want you to keep that in mind. I want to ask you to think about the way a path, a road works. When, in this episode of Flicker, we take a look at the next sayings of Jesus. We're working our way through Matthew chapter 7. And Jesus says, in words that are pretty famous, he says, enter by the narrow gate. Narrow is the way that leads to life, and few find it or few walk on it, but wide is the path or the gateway that leads to destruction, and there's many who find their way on that. And I think we have trouble with words like this because we're not really sure what is Jesus saying. Is Jesus like threatening that most people don't go to heaven? I think our immediate thought, because we're so tempted to think Jesus is all the time talking about how to get into heaven or how to avoid going to hell, when that's not really the way a first century rabbi thinks of things or talks about things. It's not really sort of a mindset in Judaism. In Judaism, especially in Jesus' era, in the first century, there's this long-standing part of the wisdom tradition in Judaism that talks about different ways of life, like different paths. There's a good path and a bad path. There's the path of the righteous and there's the path of wickedness or rottenness. You'll find it in our Bibles, in the Psalms and the Proverbs, that sort of idea that there's two ways in life. The way of the righteous, the way of the wicked, the way of wisdom and the way of foolishness. And often it's described as two different paths or two different crowds of people you might hang out with, two different doors even, two different houses you might walk into. Jesus is kind of riffing on that, but to say that wisdom and foolishness, they're not exactly equal and opposite, because there are lots of ways to get things wrong. There's lots of ways to deviate off the path. I can take a hard right here and plow right into the edge of the ground here. I can take a shallow left and slowly meander off. There's lots of ways to get lost on a road, especially in the ancient world where they didn't have GPS or other things to mark your path. I think what Jesus is saying is less about how to get to a certain afterlife destination. As much as we get hung up on how does Jesus teach me how to get into heaven, I think it's really a lot more about how do you walk the way of life that Jesus is opening up to us. And I think Jesus is convinced, and again, Christians for 2,000 years have been saying, yep, Jesus is right on this. Jesus is talking about how do you live what the really genuinely good life is. The one that lasts in this life, and yes, Jesus would say, includes life in resurrection, life beyond the grip of death. But in this life, how do I live a faithful life? How do I live the Jesus way of life, the kingdom of God way of life? And Jesus is convinced that the kind of practices he's been outlining for us all throughout this sermon on that's the picture. It's a life where we refuse to answer evil with evil. It's a life marked by generosity. It's a life where I'm not trying constantly to show off how great or pious or religious I am. And instead, it's a life that is rooted in trusting God and in loving neighbors and strangers and enemies. But there's lots of ways of getting that wrong. There's lots of ways we can deviate from that. In other words, there's lots of ways we can get off the narrow path, a good, solid path, a path that will take us to a good place. It was, in fact, those good theologians in the band Aerosmith who said famously, life's a journey, not a destination. But I think Jesus is pointing in the same direction as well. In this life, we can keep walking the Jesus way of life, and there's lots of ways we mess up at it. Notice that Jesus doesn't threaten. He says, you get lost once, that's it, you're out of the club. It's not like that. It's not about a club. It's not about what you have to do to get to a destination. It's about walking on the path where Jesus leads us, and that's just it. See, Jesus' words by themselves would sound like a self-help manual. You do these things, and then if you do them well enough, good luck, you'll get into heaven. But Jesus never offers just his words without his presence and without his community. The followers of Jesus now for 2,000 years have been saying we don't do this alone. We live this life in community with other followers of Jesus, and also we dare to believe with Jesus himself. If you're left on a road you've never been on by yourself, yeah, there's a lot of ways you can get lost. There's a lot of ways to end up in trouble. But if you're walking with a community, if you're walking with others and with somebody leading you who knows where to go, you don't have to be afraid then. You know you're walking on a good path. You know both the journey and the destination are in good hands. That's what this is all about. That's what Jesus has been offering us. Not just a roadmap saying, good luck if you can find it there, I'll meet you at the end. But Jesus promises to go on that road with us. He's been leading all the way. That's the adventure. That's what we're all about. And if that's true, I don't have to be afraid when Jesus talks about a narrow path. That means I'm going to trust. He's going to keep leading me and taking me in a good direction, and we'll see where he leads us. Join us for next time for more conversation here on Flickr, and we'll figure out where Jesus leads us next.